Okay, we're recording. Welcome everybody to a Common Sense reading series. My name is Jordan Stempelman. Um, if you could, make sure your microphones are muted. I think I've done that for everyone. Um, so I think I've set this up already in the default settings, but if not, please go ahead and do that. It'll just help with any annoying feedback. And to view the reader as they're reading, click on the speaker view. So you'll see, I think, either grid view or speaker view. If you click on speaker view, that will highlight the speaker, highlight the reader. Please feel free to use the reaction emojis at any point in time during the readings. Anything you hear that you enjoy, feel free to clap or thumbs up. I know this is such a strange format, but in some ways it can be a lot better. I mean, I wouldn't have been able to probably get these guys in here without this format, because I'm on such a shoestring budget. Do know that tonight's reading is being recorded. So if you'd prefer to turn off your video, feel free, although I think that I've set up the recording, again, for just the speakers to be featured in the recording. So this is the first ever virtual Common Sense reading series. I've been doing this series since, I think, 2010. So this is the 11th year of this series, and this is the first virtual, and I'm excited and thrilled that the first two readers will be Anis Duplan and Tim Earley. I want to just let everyone know that this event was made possible by generous contributions from the KCAI Campus Gallery and the Creative Writing Program at the Kansas City Art Institute. All the readings this fall and spring will be conducted virtually, so there'll be 8 readings in total. October's readers will be Carrie Lorig and Jane Wong. Information as well as a registration link for this reading, I'll go ahead and put into the chat box. And I'll also put links to where you can buy Anis and Tim's books as well. Do know that before I introduce tonight's readers, that we've reserved time after the reading for about like a 15-minute Q&A. So while the readers are reading or immediately following the reading, please feel free to type in your questions into the comment box, and I'll go through those questions, and as best as I can, I'll present them to the readers. Like I said, this is a one-person operation here, so I'll see if I can field everything and make it as smooth as possible. So I appreciate your patience. All right, let's get started. We're going to go in alphabetical order. Why not? So our first reader tonight is Anis Duplan. Anis is a trans poet, curator, and artist. He is the author of a forthcoming book of essays, Black Space on the Poetics of an Afro-Future, a phenomenal full-length poetry collection, Take This Stallion, and a chapbook, Mount Carmel and the Blood of Parnassus. He has taught poetry at the University of Iowa, Columbia University, and will teach at Sarah Lawrence College and St. Joseph College. His video works have been exhibited by Flux Factory, Data Editions, the 13th Baltic Triennial in Lithuania, Matthew Gallery, Newhouse, the Paseo Project, and will be exhibited at the Institute of Contemporary Art in LA in 2021. I also say that Anis graciously submitted a wonderful video poem to the Continental Review, so check that out as well. As an independent curator, he has facilitated curatorial projects in Chicago and Boston, Santa Fe, Reykjavik. He was a 2017-2019 Joint Publics Programs Fellow at the Museum of Modern Art and the Studio Museum in Harlem. In 2016, he founded the Center for Afrofuturist Studies, an artist residency program for artists of color based at Iowa City's artist-run organization, Public Space One, and he works as a program manager at Recess. Please welcome Anis Duplan.
Thank you for that intro and for reading. I should say I was like a fan of the Continental Review for a while before you approached me about it, and have like taught some of the poems and videos that are on there. So I was like, sweet. But I will just sort of dive into some excerpts from Black Space, which is a book of essays that I've been working on for the last 6 years or so. Can you hear me? Is my connection all right? Okay. The internet. For one part of Black Space, I spent some time traveling around to different video art distributors. Thank you, Michael. And I was looking at the work of video artists of color, for one, because video art in itself is hard to find, but especially I feel like I didn't really know about video artists of color, and so I was trying to fill in the gaps for myself. Um, so there's a section of the book where I write poems in response to the video art that I was watching, and this is an introduction to that. There are only two major distributors of video art in the United States. I visited both in March 2018 in search of works by Black video artists. Video art, an outcast in the family of the visual arts, isn't much talked about. Even less talked about are the contributions of artists of color to the field. In Chicago and New York, the homes of Video Data Bank and Electronic Arts Intermix, respectively, I spent hours glued to screens, watching work that stretched back to the early 70s and extended into present day. Black artists have used video art to make social critique for a long time. I was blown away by the commonalities in works by artists creating in vastly different places and eras. As a medium, video art often repurposes materials and themes from broadcast media like television and radio, which for a long time were primary forms of news communication in this country. Now perhaps eclipsed by internet-based forms like social media and YouTube, traditional broadcast media still provide a fairly reliable way to gauge what the most relevant issues of the day are. These poems, each a response to a work by a video artist of color, represent my wish to provide another platform for this hard to find work and to play with what video, a time based medium, shares with poetry: image, syntax, rhythm, and sound. Both poetry and video art also investigate what it means to be a citizen at any particular time and show that the social problems that were relevant decades ago, far from being resolved, ring true even to contemporary ears. So I'll read a couple of these. Kevin Jerome Everson, Company Line, 2009, 30 minutes. Black man behind the wheel of car pours wiper fluid on his windshield, still from inside the car by opening the door and reaching his hand out. A black man who says he makes $30,000 a year after 16 years drives a truck. Columbus, Mississippi, 1981, moved here, stayed for 5 years, went back to Mississippi. His name is Swope. Describes snow season, leaf season, cutting grass, working asphalt in summertime, city of Mansfield, many black people behind the wheels of cars, two men state. Exactly July 4th, 1975, when they arrived, when they started working their cement in relative darkness. He says he went to school in Asheville. Inside the car, as a woman on the radio sings a song where he worked before: garbage truck, ski slopes, bunch of places everywhere, bricklayer, Artesia, Westinghouse, Nashville Tire, scrapyard. He has a daughter who just got back from Iraq who reminds me of stepping in already placed footprints. This full length, it's a film really called Cinnamon by Kevin Jerome Everson. Is about a group of black drag racers. Kevin Jerome Everson, Cinnamon, 2006, 1 hour, 10 minutes. Moves a woman in a field, her back to man working the car, who calls out to Aaron, moves slowly. What flavor you want the alcohol? At a race, there are drag cars and normal cars. There are flowers, blueness of car and man's shirt, the garage window, and also in the grass and trees. Air dynamics, cooler air means cars run quicker. Aaron in blue taking off, another man, how he used to do his racing on the street from 1978 to 82. You don't have to have the best car, luck of the draw. It's God's will, hands, feet inside the car, about to race. Once she starts, sound fade, she's exiting, gives a piece to John outside. A story about after his delay box broke, after Larry beat him, respected him. John is trying to fix the car as Aaron watches. She says, won't make it. John says, no, says, it was stupid at first, but ultimately thrilling. 23 minutes, 10 seconds. The car picks up and drives. It isn't dead. The rurality of the surround. Ashley, with cornrows, says, I love you, no talking in drag. When she was 7, her dad got her a car. Feels lucky. She has 20 trophies in her room. She's sitting on the bed, black and white and silent, getting settled inside John and his influence. Is John Ashley's father? Aaron in a parked car zoning out. Aaron works at a bank and John is a mechanic and at work. Aaron has her dreads pulled into a bun, whereas on the track in a lot in some kind of forest clearing, her hair is down. The saturation is different. A black people in bleachers, a young boy prepares to race. A family unloads groceries from car into house with American flag. That's what drag racing is. It's consistency, the same shot. 4 to 5 young white boys by the fence. As Aaron is about to begin, we are inside a car looking out the windshield and the closest we get. Um, got to talk to a lot of really amazing people uh, while writing the book, and one or a couple of them were Fred Moten and Nathaniel Mackey, and I learned from Fred that he considers Nathaniel Mackey his like mentor, and thinks Nate. He said something like Nate can say anything I can say, but better, which is like unfathomable to me because Fred is Fred Moten is Fred Moten. But anyway, so this is I'm just gonna read the first part of a chapter called "New Black Music Is This." I had a conversation with Fred Moten earlier this summer where we talked about individuation. I said, Fred was talking about how individuation imposes upon the black body. With my phone held against my ear with my shoulder, I had meandered around suburban Ithaca, trying to keep my nervousness about talking to Moten in check. That scene was not unlike the current one, in which I alternated between trying to sit still and pacing around my apartment, Nathaniel Mackey on the other line. In the preface to Blue Fossa, I said, you talk about Baraka's liner notes for the new wave in jazz, where he writes, New black music is this. Find the self, then kill it. Where do we find the black self, and then how do we kill it? Mackey is one of Moten's mentors. On the phone, Moten had insisted, after I told him I planned to interview Mackey next, that Nate could say everything he could say about black selfhood, only better. It's powerful to think of the intimacy between them. Nate answered me slowly and steadily. In the course of getting to the point where you can play free music, you have to find yourself. You have to find out what your sound is. For Mackey, self and sound are analogous, one the internal counterpart to the external other. For each self there is a particular sound, which each person has to practice discovering on the way to discovering themselves. You have to find out what it is, where it is, and how to get it out. or how to translate it through a horn or a piano or a bass, whatever, which you likely call technology, he added. What are the uses of technology when trying to articulate a self, given that that self is in some ways impossible to render fully in any verbal or musical language? Or as Mackie puts it, how do you technologize yourself? How do you get out a version that at least approximates that self and at the same time registers your refusal to be satisfied that you have properly and authoritatively, or with some finality, articulated that self? The inability of language to fully speak to the intricacies of any given self are part and parcel of the process of trying to use that same language to give sound to that self. The inherent incapacity of language, then, is a tool with which to also register a refusal to be articulated. Trying to articulate while also refusing to articulate is that two-part and paradoxical process that results from Baraka's call to find the self, then kill it. There was tumult among black folks during that period, this is around the mid-60s, that had come out of the civil rights movement, continued Mackie. One of the things that involved was looking at the self that you had come was looking at the self that you had and coming to see that it had been fashioned by social relations that we wanted to obliterate. The whole regime of white supremacy and the social mores and instructions and folkways that kept that in place. You had to look at the extent to which you were compliant with that shaping. The self that you had found yourself to be was in some way a creation of that regime. Killing it would mean fashioning a new self that would be in conflict with that regime and that wants to bring about the destruction of that regime. I'll stop there. But I will say that whole conversation, I said very little, and I was just kind of like on the other line of the phone, like, oh my God, you're a genius. So that's, I'll stop there. I mean, like, I'm done.
Yeah, for a second I thought you were excerpting that.
No,
That
no,
was
no,
great.
I'm just like done.
That was great. That was great. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Henny. That was wonderful. I was stuck on that line of self as regime. I was just thinking that was echoing and echoing and echoing in my mind
Yeah,
about
yeah.
like how much of my regime is still intact and how much
Yeah.
needs to be destroyed. That was great. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Um, okay, so our next reader is going to be Tim Earley, and Tim is the author of 5 collections of poems, including poems descriptive of rural life and scenery, winner of the 2015 Mississippi Institute of Arts and Letters Poetry Award, and Lint Head Stomp. Both were released through Horseless Press. He is the recipient of fellowships from the Fine Arts Work Center in Provincetown and Hawthornden Castle in Lasswade, Scotland. His work has appeared in many journals and anthologies, including the Chicago Review, Denver Quarterly, Southern Humanities Review, Jubilat, the Echo Poetry Anthology, and the Hick Poetics Anthology. He is the lead designer of the forthcoming, this sounds really cool to me, he is the lead designer of the forthcoming tabletop role-playing game Holler, an Appalachian dark fantasy that focuses on regional folklore, labor conflict, ecological collapse, and demonic infestation. Please welcome Tim Earley.
Thank you, Jordan. Can y'all hear me okay? I want to be crouched down a little bit because I need to get a better prescription for my glasses, right? And I tend to rock a little bit as I read, so my head might bob in and out of the frame, but I'm just not going to worry about it. I'm just going to read. I'm going to read one poem from this book called Epigrams, both Ludic and Regicidal. It came out in 2018. I wrote it in memory of a good friend of mine, Tim Mazzell, a writer. We were in the MFA program in Alabama together. He passed away suddenly, and I wrote 120 short poems in about 6 weeks in his memory. Delete Press brought it out, and then it came out, and I was like, that feels too personal. And so I bought out the press run And so that book is not available. There will be no link to that book, but I still read like some of the poems in public. And here's one of them called Investigations of a Snapping Turtle. My uncle delivered the snapping turtle as a present. He fetched it from near the dam at the coal-fired power plant where he worked. It was obscenely large, possessed of red eyes. It never retracted its head into its shell. Instead, it lorded around the yard, vaingloriously curious, hissing at our terrified cats. I fed it raw hamburger. I was warned repeatedly about its powerful jaws. If it bit me, they said, it would not let go until it thundered. My grandpa wanted to make turtle stew out of it, the best stuff you can get, he said. One day, the turtle clamped down on my finger. I thought I might lose it. The pain was excruciating. The adults gathered round. Lawve, you will have to wait until it thunders, my grandma said, and they went into the house. It turned out to be a drier than average June. The turtle and I sat in the yard for 16 days and nights. I prayed for death many times. It seemed utterly content in its duty and applied a constant pressure. It never tried to take my finger, though I knew it could. When that beautiful afternoon darkening fell upon us, the first rumble of thunder was so distant that the turtle did not hear. But I knew the storm was getting closer, that it was only a matter of time. I looked into the turtle's eyes, red voids, distant time, evolution of scum and entrails. I started to cry. The next rumble was substantial, a quick fleck of lightning beyond the trees. The turtle released my finger. I felt no pain, but my finger was swollen, the size of a pine cone. That's not a turtle we should eat, my grandpa said. That's not a turtle I can take back to the river, my uncle said. The turtle transformed into a young woman with an untroubled face. This is where folk ballads came from, she said, in the days before television, and started tying one of our chickens by its feet to the clothesline, preparing it for slaughter. First this, my uncle said. Next, the rapture, my grandma said. Who would ever want to leave such a place, I thought, but then I did. I'm going to read a stretch from Linthead Stomp. This is a book I wrote 2015, 2016. It came out the day after the election in 2016, which was a tough day in America for many, many people. But it's a book that looks at my home county, which was dominated by the textile mill industry for 100 years, and then the mills went away, and the socioeconomic problems increased. And so it's like an epic poem, about 33,000 words, about a 6-mile stretch of road in southern Rutherford County in North Carolina. And none of these are titled, they just sort of flow in and out of each other. Our favorite roustabout liked to go on about the operatives remaining in perpetual debt to the company store, shook his leg like a demented scarecrow for increased emphasis. These social and economic maladies are temporal concerns outside the realm of righteous conviction. Honeywagon produces via the mortal funk of excrement, exigencies, and imperatives. Equate injury with virtue, the only industry. Injury, foster a sense of permanence with domestic instruction and systematized sportsing. Hear the mingling, high, writhing nest of banjo strings on your favorite bluegrass mixtape as baby number 4 drinks Mountain Dew from its bottle, and Pokey loses his disability check and mounts your woolly antlers above his bed. Envision a pristine waterfall in an elvish cove as Sissy cuts herself, cuts her fuck daddy out, cuts into the dead-lipped savior of every day. The social type produced by these conditions is a crucial step in your process of individuation, in your arrival at palatable deformity and consumptive gloss. Gratitude always for future blessings and present pain, interpretive authority of the working person among the roving processes of the industrial liturgical predator, a lot of vibrant play before extinction, a lot of duende and that aneurysm. To separate labor from the soul that produces it, to separate the soul from the thing produced, to separate the thing produced from its ultimate function, to separate the ultimate function of the thing produced from the Johnny House and the Doffer's lingual fluency and the nation's prodigious body count. A large, toxic spectral, material pig sputters at the edge of existence. I had to wait until revival season to act as strangely as I desired. There's a hell of a mill village one county over. So I grew up in a variety of trailer houses. My mom said, don't call them trailers, call them mobile homes. It had like a sheen of respectability about it, you know, if it was a mobile home. And they were outfitted with these pantries, and the pantry was a place of like fascination. Like anything could be in there, like utilitarian or forbidden. You never knew what you were going to find. So this is an ode to the pantry in one of my mobile homes. I didn't say trailer house. The people are a dramaturgic right. Lung, a trout, crotch, a snout, hair, wheat chaff. To be a breeder of anything is an approximation. Clothesline of rural nationalism, abatement of the influence of the terrapin gods, filter ripper. The ironing board lives in the pantry. The fly flap lives in the pantry. The Drano lives in the pantry. The RC Cola lives in the pantry. Candy corns live in the pantry. The calendar from Steele's Used Automotives lives in the pantry. Chip clips live in the pantry. The strap lives in the pantry. The broken Atari lives in the pantry. Yar's Revenge lives on top of the broken Atari in the pantry. Viener sausages live in the pantry. Pinto beans live in the pantry. Saltines live up in the pantry. The motor oil lives in the pantry. Antifreeze lives in the pantry. The toolbox lives in the pantry. The fishing lures, the prettiest things live in the pantry. Crayons live in the pantry. Mom and Daddy's house slippers live in the pantry. The medical dictionary from 1962 lives in the pantry. Abatement of the influence of the bat gods and the mosquito gods and the imp that lives in the spigot. Wire clothes hangers live in the pantry. A play pretty or two lives in the pantry. A pallet lives in the pantry. The 38 lives in a sewing box on the top shelf in the pantry. Pump house rejection of modernism. The liver mush lives in the refrigerator. The true spirit produces seizure. True love produces ceaseless laceration. The peach preserves live in the pantry. The empty bell jars live in the pantry. The sour mash lives on top of the sewing box where the 38 lives on the top shelf in the pantry. A parsonage lives in the pantry. Spare lighters live in the pantry. Dawn's back pills live in the pantry. Lye shampoo lives in the pantry. Ravioli lives in the pantry. The strap lives in the pantry. The photo album lives in the pantry. Old National Enquirers and TV guides live in the pantry. A hustler on the bottom of the stack lives in the pantry. A miniature American flag and toy-sized Atlanta Braves baseball bat live in the pantry. Burnt rubber populism, abatement of the spheres, some AAA batteries live in the pantry. Trampoline fraudage was rampant in the 70s and 80s. Doritos live in the pantry. You get caught up in there, then what? I'm going to read a poem about one of my aunts. As happens in many families of poets, bipolar disorder, I prefer manic depression, you know, runs through the familial line. This is not a surprising thing. It's more common than not, I would say. And the biography of certain kinds of folks. And so it's a conversation between Mary and the Blue Jays. So I'll just say Mary when she's speaking and the Blue Jays when the Blue Jays are speaking. Mary, how to best get the children on board with the posture and the virtue. The Blue Jays. Leviticus, Mary. And when they can't read, when the steeple howls its murderous tidings at them, when the soul drought parches up their brains, when the rabid dog blesses them with prophet snarl and foam, what then? The Blue Jays. St. Thomas Aquinas would not have cared for the pantyhose you are wearing. Mary, sometimes I can't sleep. The Blue Jays, the weather is a kind of sleep. Mary, I'm not afraid to die. The Blue Jays, us either. We are small but integral players in a perfectly orchestrated performance of divine energy. We are each a little shard of the numinous whole, so we can't really mess things up. No pressure, though sometimes we want to, and occasionally enjoy dive bombing a cat for which allowances are made. Now and again, we ponder our blueness. Mary, that doesn't seem right. I want to be afraid to die. The blue jays, if you gaze too long at the refrigerator, you become the refrigerator. Mary, when I was young and pretty, the blue jays, you were always the thing you are now. You just hadn't happened yet. Mary, so how to best get the children on board with the posture and the virtue? The blue jays, go forth to the river, strip naked and swim. If the police do not come after a certain interval, clothe yourself and release a white rabbit inside a fancy museum. Call out a nonsense word if you must. This should ensure your apprehension, so long as you know the difference between a brothel and a museum. I'm going to read two more. I'm going to switch back to epigrams. One moment. This is called Free Poetry Workshop. I imagine most folks watching this have been in a poetry workshop or may currently be in a poetry workshop. If you are getting an MFA after you hear this poem, you can drop out of your program because all of the advice that you will get in an MFA program is consolidated into this single poem. You know, this is your entire education. Free Poetry Workshop. This reads like chopped up prose. Less anger, too many birds, too few birds, too many adjectives, too many expletives. This narrative is pretty elliptical, more grounding, less concrete noun of abstract noun, more white space, more chances for breath. Use some scientific names to delineate this morass of birds and plants. Penultimate line, penultimate line, penultimate line. Ground that shit. Nice line break. Sexy line break. Random Larry Levis-gasm. I'm trying to find a through line here. I think this poem is divisible by quatrains. More resonant ambiguity, please. My response is somewhere along the spectrum of feeling like my head has been partially lopped off. Meh. And times are cold. You have mixed my idea of metaphor with some other idea of metaphor. Who the fuck do you think you are? As a person who has experienced things, it is difficult for me to read this poem. Surrealist Vespers. Try making the first line, the last line, too funny, maybe. It's like it's personal and political at the same time. This feels like 2 poems to me. This feels like 3 poems to me. This feels like 4 poems to me. I am unnerved at the number of possible distinct and separate poems this feels like to me. Closure, exposure. Try cutting everything after the first line. Invite the reader in. Peekaboo rhyme. Where is the emotional center? Its heart, its beautiful beating, snorting, multi-chamber, diaphanous, animal gurgling, classic cartwheeling heart. There? Ground that shit. Ground it. And then I'll hop back to Lent Head Stomp for one more little stretch, and that'll be it. I had this friend growing up. We were next door neighbors. I call him Filch in the poems. He just shows up all over my poems. And he ran a prescription drug ring. One night we were watching the news, the local news, and they said, you know, the mastermind of a $750,000 prescription drug ring has been arrested in Rutherford County. And they put my neighbor's face up there, and we were like, we didn't know he was a mastermind. We were like proud for a moment, you know. And I would used to give him rides, and I sort of knew what he was doing. Like I give him a ride to the gym, or give him a ride down to a row of houses. He would go in, have a transaction. On the way back, he'd give me $20. Sometimes he would give me these shrink-wrapped dress shirts. So I sort of knew what was happening, right? That's an odd, you know, payment, right, for a ride. But he shows up all over my poems. I would go back to visit him. He eventually died of an overdose of prescription drugs a few years ago. And this is a sort of an imaginary conversation between me and him. If I sanction the memorial evangelical hortatory as a yellow call administrated to the poor ass, culturally determined, benighted skeletal flash of being in the trash hills, well, then may I be assailed by temptation. And may a sentient zombie double be constructed that I am forced to converse with until I can negate my interior value system and become a bleeding roach muling on the ridgeline of an ordinary mason's imagination. Or let me drown in the river while my sisters sing and nettles converse with wind and other nettles, or give me wings so I may urinate from any vantage point, arc a limbic of angle plague, Dr. Slipstream modality. Or lay me down in the potter's field with the most exceptional masculine erudites among my ancestors, so they may dispense their many hatreds into my being. And no one will fuck with me, except celestial wolves and their 1,000 ritualized nightmare resurrections tearing at my belly or eye holes, and then whole again. I would pick the banjo for the first time in a furious way that would justify the moaning alcoholic cotillion of my younger days, and that would be one of many ways to die. In a high mountain valley, the greeny asphodels about, Filch asked to borrow my lawnmower and some gasoline. He mowed the adjacent trailer park and returned to me and offered to mow my lawn with my own mower and gasoline for $20. I felt like an emperor. I drained my bag. I filleted a barracuda. I said, I want to be you, Filch. Let me live in your trailer house with its many prescription bottles, its Spanish art, its enormous garden tub, the wind that whistles through the broken window at night and gives birth to your dreams more intense than any riveting prophets, much boots, what rust, he said, but I want to be you, to place my trailer house inside your trailer house, a citizen filled with bookish theoric and anchorite on a stoop, or just regular, with a backup generator, some cable channels, a family Bible, alive with script. Okay, I said, you grasshopper, you goat. We will be in complete amity and provoke salvation and spool catfish whiskers and survey the valley round for signs of holler ghosts or other unsavory elements, a modified stock car, an astonishing spray of gravel, 100 flasks, 1,000 pills cannot undo us. I will never forget Tammy Tonks. I will never forget Bradley Wayne. I will never forget the Nell bomb. I will never forget exploding the can of Raid with gasoline. I will never forget the bottle rockets rained down upon the home of Samuel Scruggs as his father, amped on speed and strange, delivered the semi to a faraway land, his mother in bed, unable to move from the systemic triage of her days, annexation of blood and progeny. All modern text should bear the subtitle, Tobacco should bear a bear to the heavens where their snouts and claws belong. The nascent science of the bounty system. I capped gnats until I aspirated the remaining beast of my erotic and premature. I do not speak for my people. I do not speak for people. Thank y'all.
Thank you, Tim. That was phenomenal. I got to tell everyone I was really not apprehensive about these readers, but I was apprehensive about this whole moving to this format, and I couldn't have. And you guys just made everything so wonderful this evening, and the line just kept on coming back to me, from Anais, your poem about how do you technologize yourself, and I feel like that there's something going on there where you both were able to go into this space in a way that felt wholly alien in some ways to what it would feel like to be in person, but at the same time there was something that came through that may have not come through otherwise. There's something about staring at you in this way and being locked in, knowing that there's other people around us, but locked into you in a way, and not aware of my body as much. I don't know if you guys, I don't feel as aware of my body, and so I can wholly enter into some other space. And so I thank you both for making me realize that that's possible, especially in this format. But I don't want to take up too much. I want to know if you guys have some questions in the audience. I've been looking through here, and I see, the appreciation for each of your writing and your readings tonight. And I don't see any questions yet. So maybe I'll start with one. And one of the questions that I have for both of you, because one of the reasons why I paired you two together, is this idea of, or this inclusion of documentation in your work. You both seem to be so aware of documenting experience or the experiences of others. And I wonder how you relate to documentation. How do you see that as a function in your work? I know, Tim, you were talking about, it almost seems like an antidote to prescription, perhaps, but I'd love to hear from you both about how documentation functions and how you either turn to it or turn away from it. So yeah, can I start there and let you guys unmute yourselves and talk freely about that?
For sure. I will say, Tim, I was talking to Jonica about that book. You guys are working on that together, yes? Or because Jonica was like, I'm working on a Dungeons and Dragons book, and
Oh
then
no, it's
I told
different. Yeah, I know
it's
Jonica's into it.
different.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah, yeah.
okay.
We've had a
Because
little
like, oh,
conversation
Tim's
about
like
it. Yeah,
a fellow gamer friend,
yes.
so I didn't know if that was uh anyway. The real question, um, I shouldn't even start talking because I wanted to think about it for a sec. Do you have something to?
Yeah, it's what I'm obsessed with. Sort of, I mean, everything I write about literally happened on a 6 or 8 mile stretch of road, you know, growing up, and my imagination can't escape from it. I return to it constantly. It raises sort of very thorny ethical and moral questions of representation. You know, when you're writing about Appalachia, when you're writing about working class white Southerners, you know, there's all kinds of landmines, and I've often felt sort of acutely uncomfortable in academia and poetry circles, just socioeconomic differences, class differences, those kinds of things, differences in manners and temperament, even. Um, and so it's something I'm acutely aware of when I'm writing, and it's something that you know, you're always going to just, you know, another way, you're always going to fuck it up in some way. It's never possible to do it in this pure, ethically removed way. Jason Molina, songwriter, said, the truth about it is no one ever gets it right. The truth about it is we're all supposed to try. You know, that's a nice little package there. It's dangerous territory, but I think it's very fruitful territory because of that. And I feel like I know my work like raises stereotypes. It can indulge in stereotypes at times. It I don't know that it does more cultural good than it does cultural damage, to be honest. But when I think about, do I want this kind of poetry to be heard, and do I want these voices to be heard because I had the privilege of hearing these voices growing up, I would rather have it exist than not exist on some. But it's something that tortures me, you know, when I'm writing, and the public reception of the work as well, to the point where, like, you know, this is the only poetry reading I'll do all year. You know, I just don't like to insert the work into those spaces, but at the same time, I want people to read it. So fun stuff.
I think there's like a pragmatic aspect of documentation for me, and my background is in visual arts, and so like in that sphere, documentation is like part and parcel of everything you do. It's not real unless it's documented, and I've sort of taken that into my life as an arts administrator and think about the not just visual arts practices, but practices of other writers or video artists or what have you that um, I just want to be, if anything, over documented or just documented a little bit more, so that they enter into uh, like scholarship and conversation and all of these things. So that it's like that's the sort of less creative aspect. Although I am sort of my arts administration life and my poetry life are starting to melt together, and the differences between like poetry and scholarship are kind of melting for me, and it's part of the reason I love someone like Fred Moten so much. But certainly he's not the only one who does it. But the sort of line between poetry and scholarship um, is always sort of nebulous, and um, I think that's really generative. For myself, I guess there's also an aspect of like I like to make with things that already exist because the things already exist that I like, and I don't always see the need to make new things that I like if they're things I already like. Um, yeah, so
No, I
it's
think that's
yeah.
yeah, that's a wonderful statement. Have you guys have you read Svetlana Boym's essay, The Off-Modern Mirror?
Uh-uh.
Are you familiar with that essay? Uh,
Mm.
Essentially, Boym's premise to this essay, or thesis to this essay, is that there's the postmodern and then there's the off-modern. There's the modern and the postmodern. The off-modern is returning to all of these movements or methods that occurred throughout modernism and maybe postmodern, whatever, in the modern age, wherever you want to draw that line, and repurpose them because they're already there, but repurpose them in ways that are maybe more ethical or more considerate or more productive instead of just moving forward, forward, forward. It's kind of going back. And she uses this idea of like the iPhone when it breaks and it becomes like a piece of obsidian to not just scroll and to move through, but to see something clearer, to kind of see the outline of something. It's a really beautiful essay, but I agree with that as well. You know, there's this kind of there's these neglected almost moments, you could say, or whole systems of life that get kind of just buried under by more systems and more systems and more systems. So anyway, yeah, that resonates with me a lot. I guess, and one thing I want to say is why poetry then? And you were talking about like visual art, you know, Anais, and you know, going to visual art maybe as a form of maybe mimesis or something, like trying to find, you know, the way to present something as I don't want to say authentically, but in some certain way that captures. But then I think of poetry, and there's that line by Tim. You said something along the lines of to separate labor from the soul that produced it. And I don't know, for me or for other poets I've talked to, like poetry is um, that place that lessens this separation or something. You know, it doesn't feel like labor in the way that we think of it, because, you know, it's not as transactional. It is oftentimes, you know, marginalized, whatever it may be. And so the soul has a place to kind of live there. It doesn't feel like that it's ready for either, you know, exploitation, or it's ready for commerce or something like that. So I'm wondering with you all, like, what is that, the realm of poetry and I don't know where I would go with this. Like, not the space of just being a human being, or the space of of accounting for not only your experience, or maybe a collective experience of some sort. Like, what is it? Why poetry? What draws you to poetry as an art, I guess? And Anis, you want to start?
Yeah, I mean, I guess in the same way that there's stuff that I already like and why I make new stuff, that there's also that stuff in its existing is already accounted for, and so there's a way that you know, I could, if I like, that's an interesting question because it's like all the video pieces that I was writing poems through or about, like one could, I could have also just like recorded them on my phone or something, you know, but the point wasn't so much that like I think you should see this recording exactly as like this set of ideas and like this series of images is interesting, and I want that to exist again in some other way. And poetry, the reason that I stopped doing visual art is because it wasn't uh, there was never a sense of like immediacy or urgency for me the way that when I started writing poetry, it was like, I don't need anything to do this. I could do it in my head and that would be fine, you know? And I could start right now. I could start anytime. And I need that creatively. Um, and so poetry is just always going to be the thing that I gravitate towards first. Um, yeah.
That's great. Yeah, it totally makes sense. Yeah, the accessibility of it, for sure. Um,
Yeah.
Tim, and there was another thing I was thinking too, is just, you know, for me as a poet, it's I realize that's where I catch myself in in my own ruse, in my own self-deception. You know, poems are the places where I spend time with my own language, where I can then say, that is the language that you're getting away with. That's the language that you're getting away with. You're not really, um, um, you're not in the state of seriousness or accountability or something with poetry. And after time and a lot of stuttering, it transfers over into something like this, where I can have what I feel is a more closely approximate conversation of my mind with another human being. It seems to be the only thing that'll call me out better than maybe my family or something. Tim, what do you think?
For me, I think I was attracted to poetry because I agree with sort of like the access, low bar of entry. I did not understand the fundamental principles of English grammar till I was about 30 years old and had to teach a developmental English class. I didn't know any of that stuff. But I could still write poems, and I was writing poems, and I was somehow publishing poems without this knowledge. And it was, for me, poetry is about like recreating the language as you go, remaking the language. And that's probably the driving force for me. I've always been like a sponge for words, ever since I was a kid. Love collecting words, and just to be able to use them for the sake of texture, for the sake of sound, without accountability to sense and meaning, you know, was always felt very freeing for me. And the sound of language is always very important to me. Like when I realized that the way my grandmother talks and the way my mother talks, the way, to a much lesser degree, the way I talk is way different from how the people on television talked. I was just like, wow, that blew my mind. And I just started listening to her rhythms and speech patterns. And poetry was just an easy, was sort of the most natural vehicle for me to take that vernacular speech and then do other things with it.
Hey, Tim, it looks like there's a question here. Michael asked, can you share a bit more about buying back those books that were published and how it relates to like either archive or memorial or an addendum to some type of creative act? Yeah, the buying back of that.
Yeah, this was not my plan. And I feel bad about it because I like wrote up Delete Press and I was like, because they'd done a chapbook of mine. I was like, y'all, I have this book. It's going to be finished. I would love if y'all did it. They made a gorgeous book. I was very excited about it. It came out. It was out for 2 weeks. And something about having it in the public sphere after it was such an intense private experience didn't feel right to me. It was just like keeping me up at night almost. And so I just emailed them. I said, y'all gonna think I'm crazy. I might be. How much would it cost just to buy these back? But I do think it was part of the entire sort of ritual of mourning my friend, you know. And there was something about just going through the whole process and having it be an incarnation. And his wife got it, his daughter got it, you know, some of our close friends got it. And I was like, well, that's about enough for me. I think I've done like what I said. I wanted them to have something tangible that they could show to friends and family. So I think it was sort of a book just created out of ritual, grief, and mourning. And that was sort of a form of closure.
And then, so when you read it again, because obviously, you know, you feel comfortable reading it, or you feel like it's important to read it, is it because it can enter into the air? It's because it can enter into us, and it can just go back into the place where it came from, or something like that? Like,
yeah, I'm not sure. I just feel like, you know,
I feel like I'm psychoanalyzing here or something. I don't mean to be,
right.
But like, what is the, you know, like being able to like read it out? What is, because yeah, I totally agree. It's totally different. Like, it sounds like Plato or something, like writing something down, or you know, like, I don't know.
Yeah, I just think, like I feel more comfortable in sort of the human transaction of reading, of seeing the faces. You know, this is a little bit different reading space, but it just feels, I don't know, it just feels more intimate in a way, and that suits the material. Whereas like putting it out and trying to get people to review it and trying to sell copies of it and peddle it, and the whole, you know, you're not going to sell a ton of poetry books no matter what you do. But that whole side of it, I just didn't want to take that material there. But I'm happy to share it with other people in sort of a more intimate space.
Right. But you're going to put a lot of psychic effort and a lot of time and a lot of energy. Yeah. into hustling it. Yeah, like driving to Kansas City for a reading. Yeah.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, right. There's another question here for, and maybe this will be our last question. But Anais, how do your videos or does your curatorial practice relate to your poetry? I think that's a really interesting question. The idea of like being a curator of art or other artists or writers, how does that affect your poetry or relate to your poetry?
Yeah, and forgive me if I'm breaking up. It's getting a little glitchy on my end, so I don't know if you can hear me all right.
I can hear you perfectly right now.
But am I break? You can. Okay. So the video is easier to answer. Just in, I started taking experimental film classes at the University of Iowa when I was getting my MFA, and my workshops sounded exactly like Tim's poem. So grateful for that poem. But did uh, my MFA and went to experimental film and found that there were a lot of overlaps there, and that it helped me think about time, and what it means to be a time-based medium. And I started to think about poetry in that way in particular because, we talk about things like speed and cadence and rhythm and all those things. So the overlaps between those two media, or even something like a jump cut, if you think, like uh, a really sexy line break or something, it kind of grabs your stomach, and the same thing happens in film all the time when you kind of cut really quickly from one kind of tone to another tone, and the work that your like emotional body has to do to transition between those two things can be really jarring. So things like that like going back and forth between poetry and video um, help me think about like each of them. And although video uh, than poetry, obviously. Curatorially, uh, this is a more recent thing of like writing poetry that includes um, information about other artists and writers, and trying to fund ekphrastic into sort of poetry that just like exists between my practice and somebody else's. Um, and it's funny, I'm teaching two classes right now, and one is on documentary poetics, and one is about writing about art. And so I'm working through both the documentation question and the relationship between like curating and poetry writing right now with some lovely people who I guess are my students. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I want to just let everyone know again that we'll be doing the same thing a month from now, roughly. So please check out either at the beginning of this chat, or again, you could just go to my website, Jordan Stempelman. If you look up my name, you'll find it. And under the Common Sense Reading Series, you'll see the next reading. But again, thank you so much to tonight's readers. Thank you, Tim and Anais. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jordan.
And yeah, and it really, it enlivens me for sure. Again, I think we're all feeling that. There's these, at least for me, I'm on this screen so much now that sometimes it can be a deadening space, or it can feel very, tiresome. And this is definitely enlivening, and I appreciate that. I really appreciate you all coming in, and it sounds like a lot of people do as well. So thank you, and I want everyone to stay safe. Be well, and have a great evening. That's all I got. Take care. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
You too. Bye.
Bye. Take care.